Hey y'all, Infinite Enzo here from Knox Knife Mods, and today we're diving into episode 3 of Tuesday Traditionals. Now the knife we're going to be talking about today is the Case Small Saddlehorn, one of my absolute favorite patterns, just a very cool, compact little pocket knife, and the song we will be talking about is Rye Whiskey. Rye Whiskey is a very true traditional song. It's very old school, has its roots back in England, came over here to the colonial United States. And from there it just blossomed into a very rich legacy of songwriting. So let's get into the knife first and then we'll talk about the song. So the Small Saddlehorn is, as the name would imply, a smaller variant of Case's classic Saddlehorn pocket knife, which I believe the code on that is just 100, I believe, for the Case large Saddlehorn. From the research that I've done, from what I could find out, Case was already producing the large Saddlehorn at the time that they built their factory in Pennsylvania, which I believe was in 1905, maybe it was 1902. I'm sure you guys will let me know if I'm wrong about that. But that knife, which I'll show some photos of right now, that knife has a very large clip point blade as well as a huge spay blade, like the biggest spay blade I think I've ever seen in my life. And I don't have a large Saddlehorn in my collection. It's not a pattern that has ever particularly attracted me, I think just because of the enormous size of that spay. But regardless of that, regardless of my personal taste, it's a really cool knife, and it's a legacy for Case for a good reason. It's a great design, and the way that it folds into the hand is a very good iconic part of the pattern. And they preserve that in the Small Saddlehorn. Now, obviously, the reason this is called a Saddlehorn is because of that saddle horn shape. It greatly resembles the horn on a saddle that you would put on a horse. And that really allows it to sit in the hand in a very ergonomic way. It feels great in the hand. I have smaller sized hands, but I can get a 4-finger grip on this knife, no problem, and I've still got the butt end hanging out past my fist there. So even if you have medium-sized hands, I think you can get a 4-finger grip on this knife without any issues. Now, the Small Saddlehorn and how it differentiates between the large Saddlehorn, we obviously have this clip point blade here, and we also have a skinner. And both of these blades are exceptionally useful, and I do actually prefer this skinner to the big old spay that comes on the large. Now, usually I am a fan of spays, but that thing is just so honking huge. This skinner I've found the shape to be very useful. Now, what's interesting to me is that, and actually you can see it right here on the skinner blade, this knife has a tang stamp associated with one of the world's greatest knife makers, Mr. Tony Bowes. And Case obviously had a partnership with Tony before he passed away, and they still honor his legacy in a lot of ways. But one thing that I've always been confused about with Case, Tony Bowes patterns, is whether or not those are knives that the designs were created by Tony himself or they're Tony's interpretations of already existing patterns. If you guys know, please throw it down in the comments. That's one of those things that I've always been curious about. Because as I mentioned, Case was producing a large Saddlehorn way back at the turn of the 20th century. So the fact of the matter is that we know that probably the Small Saddlehorn with its Tony Bowes tang stamp, I would guess, was Tony's interpretation of making a smaller scale Saddlehorn. And it's an absolute success. I love this design, and I love the lines of it. I love that the clip point is very reminiscent. That clip point blade and the nail nick are very reminiscent of the blade from a knife that Tony did create, the Lanny's clip. And I just love that he put that blade on this knife. I think it works wonderfully. And I think it complements the Skinner blade very well too. As we can see on this particular model, we have a shield that, once again, very reminiscent of Mr. Bowes. Looks like a shield that he would put on one of his knives. And we have, I believe that these are amber bone covers. I'm not 100% sure. They could be whiskey bone. I don't have a lot of information on this particular Small Saddlehorn because it was made, as far as I can tell, back in the mid-2000s. And it seems to have been a limited run because there is a not limited, but there's a number engraved on the bolster, which if you can't see here, that number is 288. So I'm assuming it was a 500 to 1,000 piece run, not sure which. Really, I've had a hard time digging up info on this knife. So once again, I turn to y'all. If you have any info, please throw it in the comments, which I always encourage y'all to do, because the main point of this show, I guess if you want to call it that, is to spread information as best as I can, and with y'all's help, that would make it, about 1,000 times better. Let's just try to help out whoever's watching this video, give them as much information as possible. So if you have any information on this particular saddlehorn, and saddlehorns in general, please share below. Anyway, the covers are part of the reason I chose this knife to go with this song. That whiskey coloration, as I like to think of it, it's got kind of that, that burnt orange kind of color to it, the dark browns, earth tones. Definitely reminds me of the color of some of my favorite bourbons. That is a big reason I link these two together. But the jigging on these covers is very nice. Definitely has a pocket-worn feel to it, although this isn't, as far as I know, this is not branded as one of Case's pocket-worn models, but it feels great. It's a very smoothed over kind of jigging, and it just feels wonderful in the hand. Brass liners, as always. The back springs have a couple gaps, but nothing really terrible. Blades are centered very nicely, and we have a nice walk and talk as well. It's Case's typical half-stop walk and talk, where it's a little bit mushy, but it's not bad. Not particularly loud, so not particularly talkative, I guess you could say. But I do like it, and it's easy to operate on the closing. Quite easy to operate one-handed. But yeah, so that is the Case Small Saddlehorn. I'm trying to see if there's anything I've left out here. Oh yes, one thing we'll touch on is that the back spring, at least on the clip point, let's see if that's true. Yeah, on the Skinner as well. The back spring is flush in all positions, which is really cool to see. So yeah, half-stop flush, fully deployed flush, and closed flush. Very nicely done. So this is a good example of when Case just really nails it. And I think that maybe I've been luckier than most with my Case collection in that almost every case I have is almost perfect. Now that said, I fortunately live close to a couple of retailers, and I can go there and I can handle the knives in person. And if I find a dud, I can ask to see a different version or a different copy of the same knife and find one that I want that's perfect. But even when I've been ordering online, which this was an eBay pickup, I've had good luck there. Now, I do make sure I go in the description, read about the knife, and see if the seller says, like, yeah, there's no blade wobble, which this doesn't have. There's no blade wobble, maybe a couple gaps, blades are centered well, no rubbing, et cetera, et cetera. So just a little tip on that. If you can handle cases in person, I honestly think that's the best way to do it, because they can be, a little hit or miss from the factory. But in any case, I just wanted to give you guys that information a little bit shorter this time on the history, because I really can't nail down a lot of the facets of how this knife came into reality. My theory right now is that it is Mr. Bose's interpretation of what he were to do if he were to take a large saddlehorn and shrink it down and put the blades that he would prefer in it. So that's what I think happened. If y'all know the truth of it, please put it down below. But yeah, so without further ado, let's talk about the song we're getting into today. So Rye Whiskey, very old song, and a very muddy history, as with a lot of these traditionals. It seems to have originated in England under a different song, the name of which I'm having a hard time recalling. I'll find the title and I'll put it up here on the screen. But mainly it's a song extolling the vices and virtues of imbibing alcohol, particularly rye whiskey. And the version that I'm going to play is a mishmash of a lot of different versions. I've kind of taken the song Rye Whiskey as well as the song Jack of Diamonds, which runs on the same pattern, and I've kind of junked them together. And I think it works really well. You guys tell me, but in the version I've put together for you, we're going to see the story of a former soldier who sets out and has to leave his young love behind, and he goes off to fight. Before he can even get there, things kind of go sideways. He gets too tied up in gambling and drinking, and basically his life kind of falls apart, and he ends up on a mountain wandering around by himself, drunk as the devil, as he says. So that's my narrative of the song. But it's almost like one of those songs that gets handed down, like a pair of old jeans or something, because every time somebody takes that song, they fashion it into their own narrative. And a lot of the artists that have done so would be Pete Seeger's a big one. Oh gosh, I'm blanking on one of the biggest one. Lomax. I think it was Alan Lomax. I'm not sure if that's his first name. It's not right there, but last name's definitely Lomax. A purveyor of historical, traditional songs, and as well as my favorite version is the one by the Felice Brothers. That one, they name Jack of Diamonds, but they definitely take aspects of Rye Whiskey. Again, those two songs are very interchangeable. They have the same chord progressions, the same rhythmic patterns, basically different versions of the same song. So their version of Jack of Diamonds, check that out. That's my favorite one. I'll put links down below as always. But yeah, a lot of amazing versions of the song out there. All you have to do is get on the internet and search it up, and you'll find some really cool performances. But yeah, so without further ado, guys, we're going to dive into it. And yeah, just let me know your thoughts on it. It's probably one of the oldest traditional songs that you'll hear in the United States of America. It's got such a long history, and it's definitely a fun one. It's definitely a bar house song. So we'll get into it. By the way, my guitar playing on this one is very sloppy because it's such a oh man, what's the word I'm looking for? It's a flat stomp kind of song. It's just very like da 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 da, and you're just hitting that guitar nonstop. So it's a hard one to play, even though you're only playing a couple of chords. It wears your fingers out. So I apologize in advance for my sloppy playing, but I really tried to give you the idea of how this song should be heard. It should be a sloppy song. That's how it's meant to be. So anyway, guys, I'm just rambling on here. So let's dive into it. Rye Whiskey.
Oh darling, my darling, for your sake alone I leave my sweet mother, my house and my home. Oh darling, my darling, you caused me to roam. I'm just a poor soldier and Dixie's my home. My boots in the stirrup, my bridle's in hand. I'm leaving sweet Molly fairest in this land. Her family don't like me, they say I'm too poor. They say I'm not welcome to walk by her door. Rye whiskey, it's whiskey I cry. If I can't have rye whiskey, I surely will die. So I'll gamble in Memphis, I'll gamble in Swain, going back to the boundary to play my last game. Gonna drink, gonna gamble, my money is my own. Them that don't like me can leave me alone. Gonna eat when I'm hungry, gonna drink when I'm dry. Get to feeling much better, I sprout wings and fly. Gonna take down my fiddle, gonna rosin up my pole. Gonna make myself welcome wherever I go. Jack of diamonds, I know you of old. You robbed my poor pockets of silver and gold. If the river was whiskey and I was a duck, I'd swim to the bottom and never come up. But the river ain't whiskey and I ain't no duck. So we'll play Jack of Diamonds and then we'll get drunk. Rye whiskey, it's whiskey I cry. If I can't have rye whiskey, I surely will die. way up on Mount Camber, I wander alone. I'm drunk as the devil, just leave me alone. It's beans when I'm hungry, it's shine when I'm dry. If the whiskey don't kill me, I'll lay down and die. Rye whiskey, it's whiskey I cry. If I can't have rye whiskey, I surely will die. Jack of diamonds, I know you of old. Rob my poor pockets of silver and gold.